There's a massive difference between becoming an adult and having your life completely figured out. Many people in their 20s go through this almost quarter-life crisis where they're trying to figure out what they want to do with their lives, whilst battling, looking around and seeing that everybody else seems to have the perfect life and everything figured out. I think it's important sometimes to remind ourselves that we don't have to have everything figured out, that most people even in their 50s and 60s often don't. They've just taken the course that life seems to put them on and have figured things out as they've gone along in life. I came across this post that's called 20-something does not have to be 20 everything, and I thought it shared quite a few tips that could be really helpful to just remind yourself of if you're struggling with figuring out where you should be in life and feeling that you should have already decided a long time ago. Just because we become adults officially at the age of 18 over here in the UK doesn't mean that we should know everything we want to do by that point and that we should have the rest of our lives plotted out. It's important to remind ourselves that we don't need to know everything, that that's okay, and that life is a journey at the end of the day. I wanted to talk through some of these points mentioned in the post and add a little bit of my perspective too. The first point that they mention is that you will fail. Allow yourselves to make mistakes, that you will learn so much valuable insight and information from failure, so stop playing it so safe. Not risking is actually risky itself. I completely agree with this. You'd never learn if every time you tried something for the first time you succeeded. You'd never learn to become resilient, to figure out what your strengths and weaknesses are, to grow as a person. You'd never actually have to try, and you definitely wouldn't be able to empathise with anybody else out there who struggles with things themselves. So it's almost more important to fail than it is to succeed, because you learn so much more from it. I know failure is a very scary thing. Nobody wants to fail, especially when it's big things involved, like a job that you fail and then you end up losing money or a house or a relationship, especially when you've invested a lot into those. But it's important to remember that you can learn a lot more lessons from failing than you can if you just succeed at everything in life. The next point it says is don't try to be perfect. It's not only exhausting, it's actually impossible. Again, I completely agree with this. I found myself that I've tried to be perfect. I've tried to figure everything out so that when I do something for the first time, it's exactly how I want it to be and that I never make any mistakes. But as I just said, it's more important to fail because I wouldn't learn anything if I succeeded every time. And that nobody actually expects me to be perfect. Everybody knows that we're all human, we all make mistakes. That's part of living, that's part of growing up and becoming an adult. It's part of maturing. So we shouldn't put that much pressure on ourselves to be perfect. It doesn't matter if we start a career path and then decide, that's not what I want to do, I want to go in a completely different direction. It's learning and discovering who we are. That's the important thing. The next point is that your parents may want you to do things the way they did them, or the way they think you should do them, but you need to follow your own path, even if they don't agree. I think this is a big one for parents that have specific career types, like they're a doctor, they're in the police force, they're in the army, things like that. They tend to expect their children to follow in their footsteps. You're likely to have your own dreams, desires, passions, and you should follow them. You shouldn't live in their shadow, because yes, they might have a brilliant idea of what could make you loads of money, but if it's not going to make you happy as well, it's not something you should be doing. You are not your parents, you are a completely different person, and I think one big thing that a lot of parents can often forget is that society changes so quickly, especially since technology has come around. Even going back 10, 20 years, we've changed massively. So the generations may have not changed too much in the past, but they've changed such a big amount in the last 20 years that you can't live the same way your parents did. With my parents, my mum was able to not work at all to look after us. She didn't have to start working until we were in secondary school. Nowadays, you can't not work. The mum has to go to work, the mum has to earn a living somehow because you can't afford to just live off of one salary, not a standard, regular, generic salary like most people are on. You'd have to be earning 6 figures in order to do that, which isn't what everybody earns these days. So it's important to just remember that yes, that may have been a perfect idea for them to do when they were younger, but everything's changed so much. And also it's more important that you do something you want to do, not just what seems appropriate or following in your parents' footsteps. The next point is that there is huge value in oh no moments. The things that don't go according to plan are often the biggest blessings in your life. Sometimes it just takes time to clearly understand what the blessing is. Again, that's a massive point. Going back to the failure thing, you'll learn a lot more having things that don't go according to plan. You might have this perfect life planned out. Like I've mentioned in previous videos, I wanted to be a detective. From a young age, that was my life course. Everything I chose through my GCSEs, my A-levels, my degree, was to get me to become a detective. Only whilst I was at university did I decide I don't actually want to do this anymore. And I had to come to that acceptance that that's not actually a bad thing. I've learned and discovered a lot more about myself that I wouldn't have done if I'd have just carried on in that path, because that's what I decided previously. And actually now I'm learning and growing and discovering more about myself and doing things that I actually want to do that I probably wouldn't have considered before. So I've probably experienced more blessings now because I didn't do that initial path than I would have done if I'd have just focused on that because I'd decided it before. The next point is that do things to stand out, but don't do them just to stand out. I think this point is probably talking about not following the crowd just because everybody else is doing it, you should do it too. You should want to learn more about yourself. We are all individuals at the end of the day. We're all unique, we all have different desires, different values, different thoughts and feelings about life, and we need to discover what those are. As I keep saying, life is a journey of discovery, but it is. Discovering more about the world, about other people, but also about you. We don't know everything there is to know about ourselves. That's what we figure out and learn and grow as we go through life. We find out, oh, I really don't like that sort of job. I really like dogs, don't like cats. We don't know that when we start out in life. We have to discover these things. So it's important to make sure that we're taking those risks, we're stepping outside of our comfort zone, we're stepping away from the crowd to do things differently, to discover, do we like that or do we not? Because if we decide, actually, I don't like what everybody else is doing, I want to do this instead, we wouldn't know that if we didn't try. But the latter part of don't do things just to stand out means don't just try to be different for the sake of being different. You need to do this to learn and discover more about yourself, because you might try doing something completely different from the crowd and then realise, actually, no, I prefer what they're doing. Then great, you've learnt more about yourself. It doesn't mean you can't do the same as other people. It doesn't mean you have to be completely different and turn your back on all the norms. It's just don't do it for the sake of fitting in. Figure out what you like, what you want to be doing, what's right for you, and then pick that, whatever that may be, whether it's what other people are doing or it's something completely different. That's the important thing. The next point that sort of goes off of this is to live your life according to your deepest values. Don't make being hot, rich and famous your goal, because you'll never be fulfilled. Look at celebrities. They have everything. They have money, they have all these cars, all these houses, all these wonderful fans. They can get as much plastic surgery as they want. They've got brilliant doctors and lifestyle coaches. They are taught to eat the right things and exercise when they're supposed to. They can pick the perfect clothes for them, and yet so many of them are struggling. So many of them go and see therapists. So many of them are just miserable because they realise that having all of these materialistic things doesn't actually make you happy. It doesn't actually fulfill you as a person. Maybe their values are not being met. Maybe they've decided to neglect a part of themselves or something that they used to really enjoy to pursue money and fame. And then they realise once they've got everything else, they're still just as unhappy as they were before. It's never worth giving up on who you are and what your dreams are just to go after these things. Because when we die, we are all exactly the same. We don't get to take all of that with us. But we do get our experiences and our memories. They're far more important than money, because money can't buy those sorts of things. The next point is that youth does not make you invincible, but it does give you the amazing opportunity to create habits for healthy living now. That's another important one, is to not leave things too late, to not think, oh, it doesn't matter, I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 30s, I can worry about diabetes and eating healthy later down the line. If you put in habits now, that when it's easier for you to do so because you're already young, then it just becomes a routine that you don't need to worry as you get older. So many people will just binge out on everything when they're younger and then focus and worry about it later on in their life. Well, then you have more problems. If you make sure that you eat in moderation, you're looking after yourself, you're trying to maintain a nice, healthy, balanced life, then when you get to an older age, it's already part of your lifestyle. It's not something you've got to all of a sudden stop and try and find time to start the gym and try and stop all of those takeaways. You're already doing it. You don't need to go to extreme by any means, but try and incorporate some healthy things into your life now makes it a lot easier later down the line. The next point kind of goes along with the previous one. Sleep. Eat green foods and ditch processed things. If you do not know or can't pronounce the ingredients, don't eat it. It's just about looking after yourself while you're healthy, while it's not of a concern to you. Make sure that you do get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. You do drink water, you do eat healthily. I know it's very difficult to do in this day and age because healthy organic foods cost so much more than processed foods. If you ate pizza every single day from the shop, you could get through on £7 a week, £1 a night for a pizza. But if you're trying to buy all these wonderful organic foods, it's going to cost you triple the amount. And with the current climate, a lot of us are struggling a bit more with money. So it's don't worry about going to the extreme, just try and include one little thing that you can do. If it's stop drinking as many fizzy drinks and try and have a glass of water with lemon in each morning, then do that. There's something you can do. You don't have to go to any extreme, just any little changes you can do will help in the long run. The next point is to enjoy your body and stop punishing it with your criticism and yo-yo dieting. Sort of partly including the previous points with the dieting part, make sure you just make it part of your routine, but also to not punish yourself, to not stress yourself out massively, that you're not going to have your life together at the moment and there's nothing wrong with that at all. You're going to change your mind about what career you want to do, whether you want to have a relationship and get married and have children, whether you want to live in the city or the countryside or move abroad. This is a time for learning and discovering. You couldn't do much of that in school because you were tied down to going to lessons, coming home, doing homework, you had exams and things to worry about. Now's your chance as an adult with a bit more freedom and money to experience things. So go out and do that. Figure out what you want out of life. Stop getting cross with yourself when you don't know everything you want to do right now. There's nothing wrong with that. You need to experience things. You can't just read a book and know exactly what you want to do. You've got to try different things to see what works for you. And the next point that sort of goes on from this a little bit more is, ladies, get off a timeline. Let go of the pressure of your biological clock, because stress has an adverse effect on your fertility. But I know that's a lot easier said than done. It's very difficult to just go, I'm just going to switch off stress. There we go, done. And there is always going to be a bit of a worry, especially when you're getting to your late 20s, your 30s. Of course you're going to be thinking about your fertility. Of course you're going to be thinking, how much longer do I have before I've got to find a partner, settle down and have children? We all know it gets more difficult in our 40s. So that is going to become more apparent the older we get. It's just making sure it doesn't rule everything you're doing. You don't think, well, I can't choose that career path. I can't move abroad. I can't focus on my career and forget about relationships because I've got to have children before a certain age. It's just make sure that you have it in moderation. Yes, it'll pop up naturally. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't let it dictate everything you choose just because you know you have to have children at some point, because you're going to miss out on things you might really enjoy doing just for that one thing. And then if you end up doing them at a later age when you've got children, you might realise it would have been easier to do them younger. Anything you choose isn't going to stop you from having children. It might require a bit more working around. You might have to ask for more help, work different hours, get your partner to help out more. There might be other things you need to think about, but it's never impossible. So it's never something that you should do, either I do this or I have children. Should never come to that point, which I know is easier said than done, but it is something that we need to remind ourselves. We can still do things whilst having children. The next point goes on to relationships. It says that chemistry is necessary, but not sufficient in romantic relationships. Make a list of your values and top 5 non-negotiables and do not settle. I think this is a big thing for more towards the younger generation that isn't thinking too much about long-term getting married, having children. They just sort of enter into a relationship because they find that person attractive. It's important to realise that looks fade. You're not going to have that chemistry for that person for the rest of your life if that's all you've got. You need to find a foundation. You need to have a friendship. You need to enjoy their company. You need to make sure your values align. If you want to stay at home, stay local near your family forever, and they want to go off and explore the world, you might find them incredibly attractive, but at some point that's going to clash and you're going to realise this isn't going to work anymore. You need to make sure there's more of a foundation than just chemistry. And by talking about your values and finding out what it is that you will not accept in a relationship, that can stop you from starting a relationship with someone that you're going to end up disliking because they don't match with you properly. If you don't even enter into a relationship with them, then it will save you a lot of heartache and a lot of time that you could be spending on something more helpful for you. So it's find out things like, do you want to have children? Do you mind having someone who wants to travel lots? Do you mind having someone who works nights? Do you mind having someone who has different political opinions to you or religious opinions? Some things might not matter, some things really will. Work out what it is that you really need and what you're not willing to negotiate on, because there's no point entering into a relationship if they're going against a core value of yours, because that other person is not going to change and you should never expect them to. So if it's not going to work, you don't even want to start in a relationship. You want to just go, yep, great, we'll be friends, but that's as far as it's going to go. Speaking of friends, the next point is that friendships matter. They contribute significantly to your health and longevity. Ditch toxic friendships and put the effort into friends who inspire and support who you are and where you are headed. That's massively important. We can't expect to get everything from a partner or from a career. We need to have a well-rounded life, and friends come into that a lot. We need to have friends that we can turn to that are going to be there for us, that are going to be able to support us and look after us if we're going through a difficult patch. And we don't want to have friends that we feel we can talk to and then they're going to turn their back and start talking about us behind our back. Or ones that are just going to drain us, that are just going to dump their problems on us, drain us completely, and then go off and be happy and leave us to deal with all of the stuff they've given us. Feel like we've got to carry. We don't want friends like that. We want to make sure that it's a mutual relationship. We can give, we can share things with them and they can support us. And then we can get that back from them as well. That's massively important to have in a friend. The next part is extremely important. I think it's something that a lot of people who are quite young can fall into without even realising. I know I did as well. It's that don't date someone's potential. When someone tells you or shows you who they are the first time, believe them. Don't think, oh, but they could be so much better. I can help them to grow and become their potential. That's something that a lot of women fall into, that sort of fixing role, that we can be their saviour. If only they listen to us and allowed us, we can help them to grow and become this wonderful person. That's not the kind of relationship you want to have. It might be okay for a friendship because you know you can pull away if things get too much or if they stop listening to your advice or it's getting too damaging for you. But you don't want a relationship where you've got to fix someone and solve their problems. You don't want a relationship where the actual person you're not that keen about, but their potential, what they could be, this wonderful potential man or woman, that's what you're after. They might never become that, and then what? You've wasted all this time trying to make them this person you wanted them to be, and they could turn around and say, no, not interested. Or they could go along with it for a while, decide, change their mind, and then what? It's so much better to actually see the person for real, take off the rose-tinted glasses and see that person for who they are, and decide, are you okay with who they are right now if nothing changes ever? If the answer is no, then you need to question yourself and question that relationship. If the answer is yes, of course there'll be little things that you might not like, but as long as you're happy with the way the person is right now, that's all you need. That's all that should matter. And the last point I'll say from this post is quite a long one, so I'll probably go into it again next week, is that all relationships teach us valuable things about ourselves and are a catalyst for growth. Even if they end, they are a success if you're willing to look at what you learned about yourself. That I've found massively helpful. It's changed my perspective from, I made really bad decisions, I shouldn't have entered into a relationship, I shouldn't have been friends with that person, to actually I've learnt and grown a lot. I've become a better person because of it. I now wouldn't enter into that relationship. I would now see that that friendship was toxic or unhelpful for both of us, and I wouldn't make that same mistake again. It's important to be able to look back on your past and to see what you've changed and how you've grown, and that if something bad happened, if you didn't make a good decision, to be able to see that you're now wiser and you wouldn't make that same decision now. You've learnt from it. Don't just think it's a failing, it's a silly mistake, how stupid you were. Realise that you've grown, you've changed, you made the best decision with the information you had at the time. Now you have more information, you've seen that didn't work out, So now, if you were faced with the same thing, you wouldn't make the same mistake. But you didn't know that at the time. That's why it's important to look back and see you've managed to grow and change. That's why it's important to be able to look back and to not beat yourself up for what you've done, to see that it's helped you to grow and become the person you are today, that you wouldn't be where you are if you hadn't have gone through all of those past things. And yeah, hindsight is 20/20, but at the same time, it can help you to see how far you've come. Anyway, I hope this video was interesting. I'll go into the rest of the points next week, and I'll make sure to leave a link to the post in the description of the video. Hope you found this useful. As always, thank you for your time.